The blade came down fast. Kael Riven twisted sideways as the steel sliced the air where his neck had been a second earlier. He drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest, slamming the man against the frozen wall of the border shack. Bone cracked. The man gasped. Kael ripped the dagger from his own belt and buried it under the man's ribs without hesitation. Warm blood spilled over his fingers. 3 more shadows burst through the doorway. Kael moved before they could. He ducked a wild swing, kicked the nearest man's knee backward, and used the falling body as a shield against the second attacker's sword. Steel rang. Sparks flew in the dark. The third man lunged from the side. Kael caught the wrist, twisted until the joint snapped, and drove the man's own blade up through his chin. Silence fell hard. Kael stood in the middle of the shack, chest heaving, blood dripping from his hands and the front of his coat. The 4 bodies lay still. He wiped the dagger on a dead man's sleeve and sheathed it. Outside, the wind howled across the borderlands like it wanted to finish the job. A low voice spoke from the doorway. Still alive then. Captain Rorik stepped inside, older, grayer, one eye clouded from an old wound. He looked at the bodies, then at Kael. They found you faster than I expected. Kael's voice came out rough. How many more are coming? Enough. We need to move. Now. Kael stared at him for a long second. 5 years. 5 years of hiding, of sleeping with one eye open, of tasting ash every time he remembered the night the throne room ran red. His family had burned while he crawled through the sewers like a rat. The memory still sat in his chest like a live coal. Why no? Kael asked. Rorik reached into his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in dark cloth. He tossed it. Kael caught it. The cloth fell away. The royal signet of Vathar rested in his palm, blackened at the edges, but still whole. The crest of the Riven bloodline stared up at him. Kael's fingers closed around it so tightly the metal bit into his skin. Someone inside Thornspire wants you back, Rorik said. The outer houses are restless. Dane Thorn is losing his grip. If you walk into that city with this, the court will fracture. Kael laughed once, short and bitter. Or they'll cut my head off the moment I step through the gates. Then we make sure they don't. Rorik's voice hardened. I've waited 5 years for this, Kael. I watched your father die. I carried your sister's body out of the fire. Don't tell me you're going to stay in this shack and rot. Kael looked at the signet again. The weight of it felt heavier than any sword he had ever held. Something hot and dangerous stirred behind his ribs, grief, rage, and a hunger he had tried to bury. Fine, he said. We go. They rode through the night and into the next day. The mountains of Vathar rose ahead of them like broken teeth. When the high walls of Thornspire finally came into view, Kael felt his pulse slow into something colder. Lady Sarah Vane met them in a half-collapsed warehouse near the lower gates. She was tall, sharp-eyed, dressed in dark traveling clothes that still somehow looked expensive. She studied Kael the way a merchant studies a risky investment. So the last Riven lives, she said. I almost didn't believe Rorik. Kael didn't offer his hand. Talk. Sarah smiled without warmth. Dane sits on a throne that hates him. The old bloodlines remember your father. They remember the massacre. Show them the signet in the right room and half the court will turn. I can get you into that room tonight. And what do you want? Kael asked. The same thing you do. Dane gone. The old order broken. Her eyes flicked over him. I don't care if you wear the crown afterward. I only care that he doesn't. Rorik shifted beside Kael. She's the best chance we have. Kael watched her for a long moment. Every instinct told him she was dangerous. But the signet burned in his pocket, and the faces of his dead family waited behind his eyes. Tonight, he said. The council chamber smelled of old wood and fear. Kael stood at the edge of the long table while Sarah spoke first, her voice calm and precise. Lords and ladies leaned forward. When she gestured to him, Kael stepped into the light and placed the signet on the polished surface. Silence hit the room like a blade. One older lord rose slowly. That crest was destroyed. It survived, Kael said. So did I. Voices erupted. Accusations. Questions. Hope. Dane's name was spat like poison. For a few heartbeats Kael felt the ground shift under him. The thing he had carried for 5 years, rage, grief, the need to make them all pay, rose hard in his throat. Then Sarah's voice cut through the noise, clear and cold. Seize him. Kael's head snapped toward her. Guards poured from the side doors. Rorik roared and drew his sword. Steel flashed. Kael reached for his own blade, but a heavy blow to the back of his skull sent the world tilting. He hit the floor hard. When his vision cleared, Rorik lay a few feet away, blood spreading under him in a dark pool. The captain's cloudy eye stared at nothing. Kael's chest locked. He tried to crawl toward him, but boots pinned his arms. Sarah crouched beside him, almost gentle. You were useful, she said softly. Dane needed every last loyalist in one place. You brought them. Thank you. Kael's voice came out raw. I'll kill you. She smiled. No. You'll die on the steps of the throne like the rest of your line. They dragged him through the halls of Thornspire. The same halls where his mother had once walked. The same stones that had drunk his family's blood. When they threw him down at the foot of the throne, Lord Dane Thorn looked almost bored. The last little Riven, Dane said. I should have made sure of you the first time. Kael lifted his head. Blood ran into one eye. You should have. Dane gestured. A guard raised a long execution blade. The court watched in silence. Kael's heart hammered, not with fear, but with a pure, burning hatred that left no room for anything else. He thought of Rorik's last breath, of his sister's voice, of the fire. The blade began to fall. A horn sounded outside the walls, long, low, and wrong. Shouts rose in the corridors. The great doors of the throne room burst open. Armed men in border leathers and the faded colors of the outer houses flooded in. Steel rang. Men died. Mira, the thin informant from the border towns, strode through the chaos with a bloody smile and tossed a second signet onto the floor at Dane's feet. The real one, she called. Distributed 3 days ago. The outer houses already chose. Kael surged up while the guards were distracted. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest man, ripped the sword from his hand, and drove it through the next one's throat. The executioner swung at him. Kael stepped inside the ark and opened the man's stomach. Dane was already backing toward the private doors. Kael cut him off. They faced each other on the steps of the throne while the room tore itself apart around them. You can't hold this city, Dane snarled. They'll never accept a ghost. Kael's voice was quiet and final. They don't have to accept me. They only have to fear me. He moved. Dane was skilled, but fear made him slow. Kael's blade took him in the thigh first, then the shoulder, then across the chest. Dane dropped to his knees, gasping. Kael stood over him, breathing hard, the sword steady. Confess, Kael said. In front of them. All of it. Dane's eyes burned with hate. Your father was weak. The bloodline was rotting. I cleansed it. Kael drove the sword down through Dane's heart and left it there. Silence spread outward from the steps like a wave. The fighting slowed. Men stared. Sarah stood near the far wall, face pale, calculating a new escape. Kael turned his head and looked at her. She froze. He walked toward her through the blood and the bodies. She tried to speak. He didn't let her. His hand closed around her throat and pinned her against the stone. You wanted a king who would burn the old world, he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. Watch closely. He released her. She staggered, coughing, eyes wide with the first real fear she had shown. Kael turned away from her and climbed the last steps to the throne. He sat. The crown of Vathar lay on the seat beside him, heavy and cold. He picked it up with blood-slick fingers and set it on his own head. No one cheered. No one knelt. They only watched the man who had returned from the dead and taken everything back with open hands. Kael looked out over the ruined court, over the bodies of the men who had killed his family, over the city that would now learn his name again. The coal that had burned in his chest for 5 years finally settled into something harder and permanent. He was no longer the exile. He was the crown. And the kingdom would bleed for it. If this story gripped you the way it gripped me while writing it, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you thought of Kael's revenge, and subscribe so you don't miss the next dark tale. Your support keeps these stories coming.